thing I'm gonna do is redraft the sleeve. And I'm gonna do that by ripping this off. And it was too small, down past the whole thing was too small, basically. And I'm gonna draft it this way just so I use less fabric. And because the whole thing was too small, I'm going to increase it by about an inch through the center line. And you can see what I did was I drew all the way to the center line, top and bottom, shifted it over and drew the other side. And now I'm just gonna reshape this bell a little bit. There we go. I'm gonna cut that out, pin it together, and put it on my sleeve and see how it feels. And that will probably end up with a bit of a gathered top now, which is fine because it's not going to be seen. See, that still seems really thin. Okay, it's still a little too slim. The top is fitting really well. It's just the bicep line, so I think when I actually cut it out, we're just gonna add about ½ an inch on each side right here, and that should be good. I'm just gonna draw a note here. I like to give myself notes so I know what's going on. Now, looking at the dress, we can take all of the boning off. I liked how it fit, so we're gonna end up with the boning in the same spot. Put that to the side, and the first thing I'm gonna do is take out the zipper, put that to the side. We're also going to take the skirt apart from the top. Now, I really like how the skirt looked, so I'm gonna locate that front panel again and rip it out, and it's gonna be my pattern piece for the whole skirt, just like we did as the pattern piece for the mock-up. So we're gonna keep that. I'm gonna keep the rest of the skirt just for other mock-ups in the future because it's a lot of fabric. The neck piece worked out great. So we'll put that with the sleeve because it's gotta be cut out of the tulle. Now the actual outfit needs a back line because we have a front line, and I'm just gonna do the V but higher up. Oh, my zipper went to there, so I'm actually just gonna do it down to where the zipper was. Draw 2 lines so I know where they connect, and then I can rip these 2 apart. So there's my back piece, and I've got the red and the tulle, so I'm gonna put that to the side. Now we're looking at the front piece. So first things first, I'm gonna cut down the center because I just wanna deal with half of this. We're gonna put that away because we don't need it. And then on this half, I don't mind having the 2 darts, so I'm gonna keep it as is. And I'm just drawing where those darts are so that I can take that out flat so it's nice and pretty looking. And we did draw the new armhole, so I'm gonna give myself seam allowance in that armhole. And I'm also, because this is such a large dart, I'm going to cut seam allowance out of it, like that. And then we just have to stitch rip the other dart. And I have this line here. I was a little off on where I thought it was, where I thought my point should be. So I'm just redrawing it a little nicer. And on this one too, we want it to come up to the shoulder on the back there. So I've just connected it up on the shoulder. So we did 2 lines on the back to know what connects with what, and on the front. So I've labeled these F and B so I know which piece is the front and which is the back. Because once we cut this off, it is very hard to tell. Okay, and now it's time to cut the red base. So I have washed my fabric. Always, always, always want to wash your fabric if you ever plan on washing it after. And we're gonna cut 2 of each piece of the top, not of the tulle, just of this fabric. This does have to be placed on the fold, so I think I'm actually gonna place it this way. Or my other option is, so what I'm going to do is actually trace this out and flip it over, giving myself a little more seam allowance there. And now I do have to add seam allowance on this piece here. And then I'm gonna place this right here, and we're gonna trace it out again, and this will give us 2 of this. Now the fabric I used is a little bit lightweight. I would have recommended something a little heavier, like a twill. I used this because it was the right color, and it was $5 a meter. So that's perfect. I'm going to pin these together. Now we have this empty space here, and I'm going to make boning channels. And to make a boning channel, we just need it a little longer than the bone. That works. It's just an approximation. Okay, I'm gonna draw a flat line to start. And then basically you want a bit of seam allowance, then space for the bone, and then more seam allowance. So I'm gonna end up doing about 1.5 inches. And we need 6 total, because we have 6 bits of boning. There we go. So now we need to trace out the back twice. Okay, I can fit 1 there, which is great. And I've got to add seam allowance here along that top edge. And now I just need to cut this out a second time, and I will do it here. And this will give us 2 front pieces and 4 back pieces, which is what we want. And I'm gonna pin those, and then I like to cut out the front and back pieces before we do the skirts. Now, because this fabric, again, does not have an up and down, it makes it a lot easier for me to place the skirt. And I'm just gonna cut it out. And I'm notching that center front as well at the top. I've got 1 layer done. And then we open it up. Oh, my fabric is not quite as wide as my... Dang. It's okay, I bought tons of this red material. So we're gonna cut the back out here. So this is on the other edge. So that's the back piece. I'm gonna put that on top of the front piece so I know where it is. And now I need to cut out 2 full-size ones. And I'm going to fold the fabric so it's sitting on top of itself. So when I cut out 1, I'm actually going to be cutting out 4. And I'm getting it as far out as I can. Okay, let's take a look at this tool. I haven't even opened it yet. Ooh, I like the sparkle. Okay, so we need to cut out the top again because the tool sits on top. My worry is, yeah, it's not gonna go all the way up the sleeve. We're just gonna call that okay, because we won't see it. If you are worried about it being seen or being perfect, then what you can easily do is get wider tool. And we only need 1 of each piece in the tool. So I'm just pinning this down, and then I'm gonna cut it out. I'm not cutting out the dirt right now because I want that in there in terms of being able to maneuver it how I need. You help it? Hi, sweetness. So helpful, thank you. Okay, so that one's cut, and we're gonna set that aside and cut out the 2 backs as well. Oh, it is not easy placing things onto a single layer of tulle. It is frustrating because the tulle is so light it just wants to shift. And we're gonna be covering this in the tulle slightly so that when it's moving it has the right texture to it. And then these two pieces can go to the side. So we've got the top parts of the dress. This was the back that I need 2 of. This is the front that I need 1 of on the fold. Just using that to get an idea. So I'm gonna cut this out, giving myself extra seam allowance. Then I'm gonna fold it and cut it again because we can't really draw on this. The other option I have is I can take this and fold it, which is actually a pretty good option. Okay, there's the front top done. Now hers actually has polka dots. I could not find one with polka dots for a reasonable price, so I just went with this one. These can be separate pieces. That's the back piece ready to go. Next is me watching my cat, making sure she doesn't eat the fabric behind me. We've got the neck and the sleeve, and then that is it for this material until we get to the ruffles. So I'm going to pin this, and where we have a seam here is going to be our center front notch, top and bottom. And we're actually going to cut this one out twice. And cut that out a second time. 2 of the collar cut. We can put that to the side. And last but certainly not least, the sleeve. The sleeve that's been giving us so much trouble. And I'm gonna fold the fabric in half so I can cut 2 of these at once. I know I need to add 1 inch. I'm pretty sure on hers there's a good chance they used a stretch tool, but I want this to match the rest of it, so. And while I'm here, I'm just gonna cut this straight because I know that I need it straight to do all the ruffles. And if you look, her sleeves are actually fairly loose fitting. Maybe it wasn't stretch material. And I'm just gonna cut them apart on the bottom. And the sleeves are cut. So everything is cut, and we're gonna be gathering a lot of tulle while we're at there. So just as a heads up, I'm not going to be ironing until the very end. I highly recommend ironing step by step, but once again, I am doing this quickly as a one-day build. This is how to do things quickly, not how to do things properly. So this is my sleeve. We're gonna put the sleeve aside for now. Collars, okay. So we're gonna put that to the side now. And then the top and back in the tulle, we're gonna take the pins out. This is our front, I'm opening it up. And then with our back, we're going to place one shoulder on top, making sure that that center back seam goes towards the center. Then we're just going to sew along that shoulder seam. And we're gonna sew the other one on as well, the other side of the back. Now I'm gonna trim this seam so that it's basically nothing, because what we're actually going to do is called a French seam, which means we're going to flip this the other way and sew it again so the previous seam allowance is trapped inside. And this is actually fairly easy to do on tulle because you can see. And we're doing this type of seam because we don't want any raw edges. And we're going to do the same on the other side, sew it a second time and trap all the extra bits inside. And we're going to put that to the side. We're getting to the more complicated parts. So I'm taking out the pins on this back piece, and what I'm going to do is stitch the tulle to the one piece of it, And I'm doing it in the seam allowance so that once we sew it, you won't see the stitching. And this is mostly so that I can treat this like it's one piece of fabric. And as you can see, the tulle has shifted a lot, and that's to be expected. Before I do anything too much more, I'm going to do the same for the other side, making sure it faces the other way. So we're going to put that to the side. There's a lot of putting stuff to the side. Okay, that is the correct way. I have a lot of stuff on my desk. I'm running out of space. Okay, 2 back pieces ready to go. While we have this here, I'm going to put on the casing for our boning. I've just pulled the other back pieces, the ones we did not just attach all of the tulle to. This is the ones that we're going to be putting the boning channels onto. And I like to mark where the bottom's going to be, and that lets me know where the top is going to be. And do the same for this one, making sure it's facing the opposite way. So now I'm just taking that boning channel, laying it flat along that line where we know it's going to go, and I folded under each edge the seam allowance amount. I'm going to stitch along one edge all the way up, fold the top under along that top mark we made, stitch across that, and then sew down the other side, making sure that the seam allowance amount is folded under again. And all this time we're going to be stitching as close to that folded edge as possible. And this is way too long, so I'm going to trim. And we slide that in. And I'm gonna just run a quick stitch here, and that will stop it from coming out, which is always good because you don't want it coming out. Okay, and now we're just going to repeat that on the other side. I'm just going to see approximately where, okay, about here is where it started. And close that off. And we can put these 2 back pieces to the side for now. Next is our front pieces. There's a lot going on here. And we're gonna need our front piece to reference to know where all our darts are going. So I'm just gonna put that to the side. And we're gonna sew the tulle to one piece of the front, like we did with the back pieces. And I'm actually going to start at the center front and go from there. Not laying flat on this side, it's kind of bunched up. So I'm going to grab a seam ripper and undo that stitching. Much easier to do from the wrong, like from the just fabric side. Okay, let's see if that will lay flat. Yes, okay. And I'm actually going to pin this so it lays where I want it to lay. I know, shock and awe, she's actually pinning. And we're just going to run a stitch up that side again. Now we have to put our darts in, and to do that, we need to figure out where our darts end. So we kept this piece here, and I'm just going to place it on top so it lines up. Find that dart end, push through, find the other dart end, push through, go to the other side and put 2 pins in here. And do the same on the other side. And we're going to put this pattern piece to the side because we're going to have to do the same on the lining piece. But now we're going to put these 2 sides together, making sure that that pin is the end, and sew them together. And the important thing with darts is that you want them to come off slowly. I'm going to trim my tulle here. And then for my other dart, I'm gonna put those 2 notches we had together and make this point the end. And I'm gonna trim that as well and repeat both those steps on the other side. Great. Now we have space for boobs. We're gonna put that with the backs, and we're gonna put the darts into the lining material. So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna lay our pattern piece down on top, mark with 2 pins where the end of the darts are, flip to the other side, and mark again where the ends of those darts are, and pull that away. Okay, now looking at the wrong side, we need to put our boning channels in. And I'm gonna mark this. So it was 1 inch about in from there. And about 1 inch in from there. And then we can't do our other boning channels until we do our side seams, which is the next step, so I just mark where the bottom seam is going to be and where the top of the boning is going to be. And again, you really should be ironing this, but I'm not gonna. And once again, I'm just folding down the edge, stitching along it. When I get to the top, I trim the channel to length, fold the top under just a bit. I sew a little past where that line is so that there's space for the boning. And then I also fold under the other side. This is a bit trickier, and stitch that down as close to the folded edge as possible. Now I do recommend ironing these ahead of time unless you have a lot of experience. And then I just repeated everything for the second channel. And I'm putting in my boning on both sides, and then we'll stitch the bottom. Next, we're going to attach the front to the back at the sides and at the top of the arm. So, what my camera didn't catch because it ran out of space is we then, after sewing down the front panels, I sewed the front to the back along the side seam and up at the top on both sides, making sure that the center back was the center back. Then we went through and put another boning casing right on top of that seam. You can see I opened up the seam and did it directly on top, and we did that for both sides. And now we're going to put that to the side. Now we're going to attach the front and back of the good pieces, the ones on the outside with the tool, and we're going to lay down our front piece so that the side with the tool is facing up, and we're going to take our back piece and lay it down on top so the tool's facing down, and just line up those side seams, making sure we have the correct side, so it is the side seam we're sewing on and not the center back where the zipper is going to go. So I'm going to sew down the side seam here, and then I'm going to sew along the shoulder seam here. Then we're going to do the same with the other side. And my bobbin ran out. When did it run out? Partway through here, so nothing else was sewn. Oh, today is just one of those days, isn't it? Okay, time to wind more bobbin. Now we're just going to place this to the side and look at the sleeves. I'm going to undo the pins. We don't need the pattern piece. And we're going to sew these together. with the least amount of seam allowance we can. I'm actually going to start at the top and go down. There's one. We're going to do the seam on the other one as well. Then we're going to trim these seams as close to that what we just stitched as possible, because we're going to turn this around and make a French seam out of it. And then we're just going to flip this the right way around and stitch the seam again all the way down and do it on both of them. Okay, and now, so about 1/3 of the way up on the bell to 1/3 on the other side, I'm just going to do a big basting stitch and leave lots of long strings. And I'm going to do that for both of them. Going back down to my normal stitch. Okay. Now we're going to use pins. So looking at the good side of the bodice, we're going to make sure that the sleeve is good side out. And we're going to match them up. So to start, we're going to put that underarm seam to that French seam we just did and pin. Then we're going to match the notch to this shoulder seam. And then I'm just going to walk these together. So I'm smoothing out this side of the sleeve to the bodice up until we get to the stitching, that basting line we did. And we're going to do the same on the back piece. And now we have a lot of the tulle left for a small amount of sleeve. So what we're going to do is take one of these long pieces we left and just gently tug it until the tulle is the same length as the fabric underneath. And then I just like to do X's over the pin to hold that and stop it from undoing. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. We're going to grab one of the threads, pull it until it's the same, and then wrap it a bunch of times around this pin. That stops it from undoing on you when you're sewing it. And then you can also, after it's wrapped up, go through and even out all of that gathering. And then we're going to stitch all the way around, starting at the underarm. And we're taking our pins out right before we sew them because we don't want to sew over our pins. And then I like to go back and trim all of the threads because you have quite a few here from the basting and everything. And we have one sleeve. So now it's time to do the same on the other sleeve. And there is extra tulle on the bodice part of this, so I'm just going to trim that now. We have a shirt with sleeves, and we're going to put that to the side because our next step's going to be a lot of gathering for that. But before we do that, we're going to sew the skirt together. And we're doing the skirt so that we can do all the gathering all at once. So much like we did last time, I'm going to take my 2 panels and 2 panels and sew down one seam. Now we are going to turn these into French seams just in case we see them. So if you have fabric that has a side to it, I would do wrong side to wrong side. My fabric's the same side back and forward, so it doesn't matter which side I sew. When I'm doing French seams on something like this skirt that has so many seams, I actually like to sew everything together, wrong side to wrong side, trim all of the seams, and then sew it together again. So this is the other side panel, and we're just sewing down one seam. And then I'm going to open this up and find my center panel piece and sew this down to one side. Then we're going to go to the other side of that front panel, the one with the fold in it and the center top knot. we're going to take this other piece we sewed together, open it up, take one side, attach it to the side of the center front panel, and sew all the way down that. Now we're going to find the edge of this panel here that we just sewed on. We're going to find our back piece, figure out what was the straight side, and we want that straight side to go towards the inside, and that's not the side we're connecting. We're connecting the side that was on an angle. Then I'm going to lay this piece down, and I'm going to go all the way to the other side, and we're going to connect these. Again, that curved side to the curved side. And then the last seam we're going to connect is that back seam. However, we're gonna start it 10 inches down, or whatever your waist to hip measurement was. This is so that we can actually get it on. Okay, I don't know how much that caught. So we sewed this one way, then we trimmed everything really small, just like we did with the sleeves. We sewed all the way around, going 10 inches down from the top here. We trimmed it all, flipped it the other way around, and sewed it again. So this whole thing is French seams. Hopefully I do have the footage, but if I don't, not the end of the world. There's a lot. It took forever. Now what I'm going to do is, because ideally you'd want to let this hang for 24 hours before you hem it, I'm not going to take that long. I did start this afternoon, so I'm going to let it hang overnight, and tomorrow we're going to hem it and then do all the gathers. And the gathers will take a while, but it's what you got to do to get the look you want. So now, I'm going to hem it, and I'm going to give myself the longest possible hem because I'm going to end up wearing heels with this. So for that, I'm going to start on a random section, and I'm going to give just about like 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch up. And the other thing I'm going to do is just kind of smooth out where it's gone a little wonky. Now, because this is a curved hem, like each panel curves a bit, you actually want quite a small double fold hem. If you're having trouble folding this really small, the other trick to do is to stitch it once, trim it, and then fold it twice. Next step is to take this and our top with the sleeves and all of our ruffles, and we're gonna go pin them. So you also want scissors and a butt ton of pins. I started by attaching 10 of my long strips together. I ended up not using the shorter strips. And then after 10 were attached, I left one for the veil. I ended up using a gathering foot just to gather them all up. It had its issues. My machine needs a tune-up. On top of that though, if you don't have a gathering foot, which is totally fine, you can do a zigzag over a thicker piece of thread and then use that thicker thread to gather it in, or you can do the normal like basting stitch where you take one of the threads and pull it. Because I was gathering so much though, I really would recommend a zigzag over top of a thicker thread, like an embroidery thread or something like that. You can see me do this with the veil if you're interested in seeing exactly how it's done. This is actually hours upon hours of work that I have time-lapsed down so that you're not nearly as bored as I was while I was doing it. I mean, I was listening to a podcast, so it wasn't that bad, but this is by far the most time-consuming part of this costume, is just gathering everything. It takes forever, so know that that's normal. Let the gathering commence! I started on the bodice. Now that top edge, because we haven't attached like the other part of the top yet, is where the gathering's going to go. I ended up doing about 6 layers. I just started at one of the center back seams, worked all the way across to the other center back seam, trimmed my fabric because it was all one giant long piece, and then did that again, starting from the one side all the way over. And I used the same pins. I pieced it over, I would take the pin out and pin it through 2 layers of gathering instead of just one. This was time consuming. I did it until I had 6 layers. My cat did try to help off and on. And eventually I had all the pieces. Now I kept all of my pieces, all 6 layers, the same length. My decision was to cut it afterwards because my fabric came in that 10-inch length. I didn't want to fuss with it until after so I could make sure that it looked right in the lengths. And it was easier. So I did struggle with the skirt for a little bit, trying to figure out exactly where everything should sit. For some reason my brain just wasn't working, but I did eventually figure it out. We want 5 tiers, so I just had to make sure that they were equal from the bottom up, knowing that I had 20-inch fabric. Although I did end up trimming the bottom layer to make it more even. It was quite a bit of math. I just wanted the 5 layers to be equal. So what I did was I measured down my 5. I marked up from that mark the 18 inches to know where I have to sew down each tier. Now what I'm going to do is measure out how much down that is and mark it on every seam, and then we can follow those lines for pinning. And I'm just going to connect this over. Now the chalk that I'm using is chalk that disappears with heat, like steam, which means that I can easily take it off. Now I'm noticing there's a bit more gap as I go down. I'm not sure why, but I'm okay with that. Visually, it will look fine. My brain's not mathing today. Okay, perfect. And I'm gonna find the center back line. And our next step is we are going to pin here and go all the way around. I like to start at the bottom because it's a lot easier to pin. When we pin, we want to make sure we're only pinning one side. You're not pinning to yourself or anything. And then honestly, I just went all around and pinned everything. I ended up doing 2 layers on every tier just to make it look more full. And it got intense. This took a full day of just pinning these. I know I said that initially this was a 1-day build. That's a complete lie. There's a reason this video is coming out a year after the first video came out. Because after I finished it, I didn't want to look at it to edit all the footage. But yeah, time consuming, but it works in the end. And then it was back to the sewing machine where I just ran a basting stitch all the way across the top from the center back all the way across. Now this is our good piece, so the piece with the tulle on it, and we are attaching all the ruffles down all the way. I had a couple mistakes where I had to stitch rip it and then do it again because I wanted to make sure that the fabric underneath wasn't bunched up or anything, and it is hard to do, but worth taking your time and doing it right. And when the top was done, it was time to sew down all 5 tiers of the skirt. This took me 2 or 3 days, you can tell by the costume changes, and I did take my time to go on my phone and stuff because it drove me crazy. There was so much fabric, it was hard to get a good camera angle on this. It took forever. So, take a deep breath, walk away if you get too frustrated, there's no shame in that, and come back when you're ready to do it again. Take your time. after everything was sewn, I felt it was time to trim all the tiers to the length that I wanted. And that meant that I was trimming the top tier and the very bottom tier. I wanted to make sure the bottom tier wasn't going past the hem too much. And I wanted to make sure the top tier was the correct length because the 10 inches was far too long. So I just used a book on the dress because it was easier than measuring down all the tiers and trying to mark and draw a line when something's gathered. And for the top, I ended up doing each tier, or every 2 tiers, a different length to have a staggered effect like it seems to have in the photos. So we've got the shirt. Let's figure out where that lowest point is. I think it's right here. Gonna pin that. We're gonna take the shirt and sew it on top of all the ruffles. Okay, we're gonna start at the point, go all the way up one side and all the way up the other. So we're gonna sew all the way along here, making sure that this lines up as much as we can. And trying to get everything to lay flat as we go. And this is where we really want to take our time. I'm gonna put a pin where the shoulder seam is so we can line those up. See, that's frustrating. See, I can't pin it because it's on a curve. So there's a lot to keep track of. We've got all of the ruffles. We don't want to pull up the fabric underneath. All the ruffles need to be down. Then we're going to take this piece over and on top. And I want to stretch it just a bit. Okay, and we're really making sure we don't get the sleeve there. I've got one side. To do the other side, we're actually going to fix this section, because why? Where it starts. Why? Why is this so bad? Okay, I'm going to unstitch this, restitch it from this side so I can see what's happening. Okay, so this is gonna be the like center point, and we're gonna turn on that point. Hey, this lines up about the same, oh, lines up perfectly with the side seam, so that's a good sign. We have a top, kind of. So this eventually is going to go into the lining. Oh, there's a lot. So now we're going to attach this to the skirt. So I'm going to find the center front. Okay, so we've got a pin in the center front. Now I'm going to find my skirt. I've put this to the side. There's a lot here. Put that to the side. We're going to grab the skirt. And find, aha, there's that center front notch. And we're gonna put the ruffles to the shirt. And I'm actually gonna pin this. What? I know. 1, 2. And then we're gonna stitch the whole thing. So now I was gonna sew it this way. I'm actually gonna sew it from the skirt side so we can see where that stitching line is and follow it. So the pins are gonna be on the bottom, but it is what it is. Okay, there's a lot here. So now, that worked pretty well. I am happy. So the next step is we're going to, good side down, put our boned like lining piece in here. So we're gonna put it face good side down, so when it comes up, it's good side out. So the good side of this lining piece attaches to the bad side of the skirt, the inside of the skirt. And I'm gonna sew this from this side. It's so much. You can't even see. I've got another camera going so you can actually see what I'm doing. The nice thing about using zip ties for boning is that if you actually sew into it, you'll hear it on your machine, but it's not going to kill your needle. Your needle is not going to go flying. It's not going to stop, and then you have to take it out. So now we're going to grab those two top pieces and pull them up. And these are going to sandwich together so that the inside's going to end up finished. I'm going to trim this point down a bit. So I got that point, pulling all this up, including the shirt. And then I'm going to fold this over and pin it from the other side. And we're gonna go all the way around and pin the whole thing. And we're gonna pin the armhole as well. So I'll be right back. So we gotta stitch this down, but I think I actually have to do it from this side so I can make sure that we're not catching. So we're gonna stitch out, stabs herself, the lining down all the way along here, all the way around. And I'm just going as close to that edge as I can, making sure all of the ruffles are up. Add another stitch along the neckline all the way along because there's going to be quite a bit of pressure on that. Then I took the neck piece, like the collar piece, and attached it around the neckline of the top of the dress. So it's hard to see because this is the tulle, well, organza on organza with a backing of organza. But I just went all the way around, making sure that the center marks that we had notched before were lined up together. And I was pinning this to the outside, good side to good side. Oh, it's ripping even more. Oh my god, this is the worst. Oh my god, it's ripping in other places. Okay. It's ripping because it's too thin. We're gonna ignore that and move to the zipper because I don't have the strength to deal with this right now. Okay, we're gonna do the armhole first. So now we're doing something very similar to the armhole, tucking it in, and you can pin this. I'm just frustrated and need a moment away from the pins. And I'm just making sure I'm not catching the sleeve here. And I'm really just making sure all the seam allowance is tucked in so that it's not going to be itchy and scratchy. Okay, I did half the sleeve. I'm going to go back down to the bottom and start on the other side, trimming a bit of that curve so that I can tuck it under. I am ripping the collar off, cutting it off, because I'm gonna layer it on top, but edge it with red. Once we get the other sleeve done, we can bind the neck. Okay, sleeves are attached. Let's tackle the neck issue. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm going to sew this other neck piece to the neck here. And when I do that, I'm going to sew this to it like this, because we're gonna wrap it around the seam allowance. I'm lining up the outer edges so that most of that bias strip that I have, a piece of fabric that is cut on the bias, is going with all the extra fabric to the left of my sewing seam. And just stitching it all the way across the neck with the neck seam. So now I'm folding it this way, folding it in half, and I'm gonna stitch it again. So we're turning it around. Let me just hold that. So I'm tucking that other collar down, and I'm flipping this out, turning it in half, and then turning it again. So we're basically trapping all the seam allowance inside. Okay, that should be a lot sturdier now for the neck seam. Now we're going to take those two collar pieces and do the same thing. Oh look, I've got another piece. Okay, so now I'm pulling the two collar pieces up and sewing the two collar pieces together. Much better. It's not like coming apart anymore, and it's going to be much more comfortable to wear. So now it's zipper time. So to do this, we're going to turn this whole thing inside out. And the first trick to sewing the zipper is to sew a really long basting stitch all the way down that center back line, which we want to do with good side to good side. But there is an issue before that. And to be proper, we should actually stitch rip the lining just a touch. Yeah, we've spent this much time on it. So the lining, which is this good side here, I'm going to unstitch it just about an inch or two. Just a little bit. This way we can put the zipper in without it. So now that the lining is off, just there, I'm going to grab this top and this top, put them together. So I'm pushing all the ruffles in, pushing up the seam allowance, basted. Next step, we're going to take our zipper and I'm going to just sew it along this edge all the way down, and then sew it along the other edge all the way down. Now the other way you can do this is to lay this flat and pin it from the other side, but you will have visible stitching there. I would prefer to see the teeth of the zipper and have it open a little more, just so there's less chance of the ruffles getting caught in it. Remember to put it back down to a regular stitch. You're not basting this part in. And now we're shifting to the other side, again making sure we're not sewing that lining. Okay. Now we can take out the basting very carefully, and you could choose to stitch this down here so we don't see it. I'm going to count on the huge veil to cover it. Now I just went too fast and ripped my stitching, so I'm gonna have to fix that. And by that I mean ripped my material and put a hole in it. Take your time. To fix this, I am going to fold it so I'm looking at just the material, use my zigzag, and sew up and down it. So now we're gonna sew the lining back. So I folded this in a bit more, and I'm making sure that this is laying nicely. I'm folding this in a bit more on the back side so that it's in a bit, and I'm gonna stitch it down. And if that was hard to follow, basically I am making sure the zipper is folded out, all the seam allowances going to the left. I am folding my lining on top and stitching it on that zipper seam all the way down. You really want to make sure that the lining is away from the zipper edge but still stitched down so that it doesn't get caught in the zipper. We're going to have enough to deal with all the ruffles. I'm gonna do up the zipper. Gonna take a moment and trim my threads here. My next step is gonna be to bind this seam here up the back like we did the neck, because we don't want that to come out either. I took another strip of bias and I laid it along that center back seam at the very top where it's just organza, and I sewed all the way down that to where it connects to the rest of the dress, the ruffle line as it were. This is the start of our bias binding. Then we unfold and push all the bias binding out, corner it in on itself, and then turn it around again and stitch it down, much like we did with the neckline, but just on the edge seam. And what I'm going to do is just hand stitch this down after, so it's tucked in. And now we just repeat the same thing on the other back seam on the other side. There's a little bit of the bias binding left at the very top of the collar, so I took a moment to fold that down and stitch it down so we didn't have any weird little extra fiddly bits. In theory, all that's left is to put God, I hope this fits. Buttons here on the top. And I'm gonna use this little bit. This is cool. This is fine. There's no space for anything. This is all very caught and I'm very frustrated. Woohoo! I'm going to grab 2 buttons. So I'm going to put them here underneath. We're going to put 2 buttons and then we're going to make button loops on this. Then I looped a bit of elastic around the button and made sure there was enough extra to sew it on, and cut 2 of those to make the button loops. Now to make sure they don't fray, I'm just going to burn the edges just a touch. And now on the other side of the collar, so that it lines up, I'm going to take this and fold the 2 edges in and over top of each other, because I like the look of that. Okay, lining it up, and I'm just going to hand stitch them together. And I'm only going to stitch it to where the binding is because I do not trust the other fabric not to just also fray. And I'm just going to repeat that for the second button. There you go. So in theory, all that's left is the veil and the bouquet. Let's do it.